You're standing in the supplement aisle, and the probiotic bottle in your hand costs $45. 60 capsules, a 1-month supply. You flip it over. One strain, maybe two. 10 billion CFU. You put it in your cart anyway, because your gut has been a mess for months and nothing else has worked. Probiotic supplements average $30 to $50 a month. Some premium brands run past $60. That's $360 to $600 a year for capsules containing 1 or 2 bacterial strains, grown in a lab, dried, and packed into a shell that costs a few cents to make. Now, picture a mason jar on a kitchen counter. Cloudy white liquid, a few small rubbery grains floating inside. That jar contains more live bacterial and yeast strains than anything you can buy in a bottle. For about $1 a batch, made from milk you probably already have in the fridge. That jar is kefir. And once you have the grains, you never buy probiotics again. 2 ingredients. 10 minutes of hands-on work. The rest happens overnight, while you sleep. Kefir is one of the oldest fermented foods people still make today. It comes from the Caucasus Mountains, where it's been made for over 2,000 years. Milk fermented in leather pouches, carried, shared, passed down. The grains you'd use today are, biologically, descendants of that same culture. Every household that kept kefir alive did the same 2 things: fresh milk and a small amount of the culture from the last batch. Nothing else. For most of that history, kefir grains were never sold. Highland families in the Caucasus guarded their grains and passed them hand to hand, to a daughter starting her own household, to a neighbor who'd lost their culture to spoiled milk, never to a stranger with money. That's still true today in a different form. Almost nobody who keeps a kefir culture buys grains more than once. You get a start from a person, not a subscription from a company, and then you have it for good. This isn't a family recipe passed down at a farmhouse table, and it isn't a personal cure story. It's a straightforward comparison. What food scientists have documented about a 2,000-year-old fermentation process, set next to what's actually inside the bottles marketed as its modern replacement. Researchers have studied kefir's microbial makeup for decades, and the findings read less like folklore and more like a quiet rebuttal to the supplement aisle. A living culture, sourced once, outperforming a product built to be reordered every 30 days.
The information in this video is for educational purposes only, compiled from open sources, and does not substitute medical advice. Please consult your doctor for any health-related concerns.
The comparison that follows draws on published microbiology and the industry's own shelf life standards. Not opinion, and not a testimonial. In the next few minutes, exactly what's happening inside that jar, why it outperforms most capsules on the shelf, the 2-ingredient method start to finish, the honest cost math, and where to actually source your first batch of grains. By the end, you'll know how to never buy a probiotic bottle again. Before the method, you need to understand what's actually in that jar, because it explains why kefir beats most supplements you'd buy instead. Plainly, kefir grains aren't grains at all. They're a rubbery cluster of bacteria and yeast, held together in a matrix of proteins and sugars. When you drop that cluster into milk, the bacteria and yeast start eating the natural milk sugar, lactose, and converting it. The bacteria produce lactic acid. The yeast produce trace amounts of carbon dioxide and alcohol, less than 0.5%, about the same as a ripe banana. Together, that's what turns milk into kefir: thick, tangy, faintly fizzy. Here's the part that matters for your gut. A typical probiotic capsule contains 1 to a handful of lab-selected bacterial strains. Researchers studying artisanal kefir grains have identified up to 50 different bacterial and yeast species living inside a single culture. The official definition from the International Scientific Association for Probiotics and Prebiotics, building on the original FAO and WHO standard, is live microorganisms that, when administered in adequate amounts, confer a health benefit on the host. Kefir fits that definition, with far more diversity than most bottles that use the same word on their label. Plainly, why does diversity matter? A single strain capsule can only do what that one strain does. It has to survive stomach acid alone, colonize alone, and if that particular strain doesn't suit your gut, the whole bottle does nothing. A living culture of dozens of cooperating species gives your gut a broader, more resilient population to work with. And because the organisms are alive and multiplying at the moment you drink it, rather than freeze-dried and sitting in a capsule for months on a shelf, more of them survive the trip. The bacteria and yeast in kefir don't just coexist, they cooperate. The yeast break down some milk proteins into forms the bacteria can use. The bacteria create the acidic environment the yeast need to thrive. Neither does its best work alone. That's the same reason kefir grains, once established, are so hard to kill by accident. The culture is a self-balancing ecosystem, not a single fragile strain sitting in a gelatin shell. And you only need to acquire that ecosystem once. Every time you strain a batch, the grains stay behind, ready for the next quart of milk. You aren't buying bacteria every month. You're feeding the same living culture, indefinitely. Plainly, here's what's rarely printed on the label. Industry standards allow a probiotic product to lose between half a log and a full log of CFU over its shelf life. In practice, that means a bottle labeled 50 billion CFU can legally contain as few as 5 to 15 billion live organisms by the best buy date stamped on the bottom. You're often paying full price for a fraction of what the front of the bottle promises, and you have no way to check which fraction you got. Kefir doesn't have that problem, because you're not buying a dried, shelf-stored product at all. You're drinking a culture at the peak of its activity, hours after it finished fermenting, the same day or the next. There's no shelf life to decay on because there's no shelf. 2 ingredients: milk, about 1 quart per batch. Whole milk makes the creamiest kefir. 2% works fine. Skim works, but comes out thin. Raw milk, if you have access to it, produces the most complex flavor. Avoid ultra-pasteurized, shelf-stable milk if you can. The high heat processing weakens the final texture. Standard pasteurized milk from any grocery store works well. If you're dairy-free, the same grains can be used with coconut milk for a few batches before they need a rest in dairy milk to stay strong. Or you can start with water, kefir grains instead. A different but related culture that ferments sugar water rather than milk and works the same 2-ingredient way. And kefir grains. A small handful, about a tablespoon, is enough to start a quart. You don't buy these repeatedly, you get them once from an online culture supplier or a fellow home fermenter, and they multiply as you use them. When you're sourcing your first batch, look for grains sold as active or live, shipped in a small amount of milk or whey, rather than fully dried. Dried grains work too, but take a batch or 2 longer to wake up. That's the entire ingredient list. No capsule shell, no filler, no flavoring, no 30-day expiration pressure. Here's exactly how to make it, step by step. Step 1. Put your grains in a clean glass jar and pour in your milk. No heating required. This is the first thing that trips people up coming from yogurt making. Kefir grains work at room temperature, and heating the milk first can actually stress the culture. Skip that step entirely. Step 2. Cover the jar loosely. a cloth or a lid set on top, not sealed tight. The culture needs airflow, and a small amount of gas will escape as it ferments. A tightly sealed jar can build enough pressure to push the lid off, so loose is correct, not a mistake. Set it somewhere at normal room temperature, out of direct sun. Step 3. Let it sit for 24 hours. That's the entire active fermentation window. You'll see the milk thicken and the grains rise toward the top. Give the jar a gentle swirl once, halfway through, just to keep things moving. You don't need to babysit it beyond that. In a warmer kitchen, it may be ready closer to 18 hours. In a cold kitchen, it can take up to 30. Taste is the real test, not the clock. Before the final steps, one number worth pausing on. The U.S. dietary supplement industry is on pace to cross $70 billion a year, with analysts projecting it toward $100 billion within a few years. None of that growth comes from teaching people to grow their own culture in a jar of milk. It comes from repeat purchases of products that, as the last section showed, often deliver less than the label promises by the time they reach your hands. Step 4. Strain. Pour the jar through a plastic or nylon strainer into a clean bowl. Not metal. Reactive metal can irritate the culture over time if used repeatedly. The liquid that passes through is your finished kefir. The grains stay behind in the strainer. Give them a gentle stir with a plastic or wooden spoon to help the thicker kefir pass through. Step 5. Move the grains straight into a fresh jar of milk to start the next batch, and refrigerate the kefir you just strained. It keeps for about 2 weeks in the fridge, and it gets tangier the longer it sits. So drink the mildest batches first if you prefer a gentler flavor. A note on pace. Healthy grains grow. Within a few months, 1 tablespoon can multiply into 3 or 4, more than you need for a single quart. When that happens, either split the extra into a second jar and make a bigger batch, slow them down by using a bit more milk per batch, or do what kefir keepers have always done. Give a spoonful to someone who wants to start their own jar. That's how the culture has stayed alive for 2,000 years, without a single company ever owning it. Room temperature also shapes the outcome. A warm kitchen in summer ferments faster and tangier. A cool kitchen in winter runs slower and milder. If your kefir isn't fizzy or tangy enough, move the jar somewhere warmer, or give it a few extra hours. If it turns sharp and yeasty, it fermented too long or too warm. Pull it back a few hours next time. Step 6. Optional, but worth knowing. If you want fruit flavor, don't ferment the grains with fruit in the jar. Sugar and acid from fruit stress the culture over time. Instead, once you've strained the plain kefir, stir in fresh fruit and let that sit at room temperature for a few more hours before refrigerating. This is called a second ferment, and it costs nothing extra beyond the fruit you already have. Step 7. Troubleshooting. If a batch ever smells sharply of alcohol, looks pink or orange, or the grains stop multiplying over several batches, something's off. Usually metal contact, chlorinated tap water, or a jar that wasn't rinsed clean of soap residue. Switch to filtered water for rinsing. Use only glass, plastic, or wood, and the culture typically recovers within a batch or two. If your kefir turns out too thin, you likely used too much milk for too few grains. Let the grains multiply for a few more batches before scaling up your jar size. If it separates into curds and a thin yellowish liquid, that's whey. It's not spoiled, just over-fermented. Strain it a little earlier next time, or keep the whey for baking. That's the entire method. No heating, no thermometer, no incubator, no oven light. Milk in, 24 hours, strain, drink, repeat. 2 ingredients: 1 jar. A culture that never runs out. A few of the most common questions about this method. Can you use store-bought kefir as a starter instead of grains? Once, maybe. But most bottled kefir has been pasteurized after fermentation, which kills the culture, so it won't reliably restart a new batch the way live grains will. It's worth trying with a bottle labeled live cultures. But grains are the reliable route. What if you forget a batch for a few days? The grains are forgiving. Left in milk in the fridge, they'll simply ferment slowly and wait for you. Just strain and refresh when you remember. Going on vacation? Give the grains a large jar of fresh milk, put the whole thing in the fridge, and they'll hold for 2 to 3 weeks without attention. For longer breaks, grains can be rinsed and stored dry in the freezer. Is kefir safe if you're lactose intolerant? Most of the lactose in the milk gets consumed by the culture during fermentation, which is why many people who react to regular milk tolerate kefir well. If you're highly sensitive, start with a small amount and see how you respond. What if you're on antibiotics, immunocompromised, or pregnant? Talk to your doctor before adding any live fermented food, kefir included. Antibiotics can kill the culture's usefulness anyway. And anyone with a compromised immune system should get a doctor's go-ahead before introducing new live bacteria. This video is a method, not a medical recommendation for your specific situation. Here's the real comparison. A month of mid-range probiotic capsules runs $30 to $50. A month of homemade kefir, drinking roughly a cup a day, uses about 4 quarts of milk. At current prices, somewhere around $6 to $8 in milk, total. That's a saving of $25 to over $40 every single month, compounding for as long as you keep the culture alive, which, kept in milk, is indefinitely. And the variations cost nothing extra. Blend your kefir into a smoothie instead of buying a bottled probiotic drink at $5 each. Use it in place of buttermilk in any baking recipe. Let it strain overnight through cheesecloth, and it thickens into a spreadable, tangy cheese. The same texture as the $8 cultured cheeses in the specialty aisle, made from the same jar you already have on the counter. Even bottled kombucha, the other trendy fermented probiotic drink, runs $3 to $5 per bottle at the store. Kefir gives you the same live culture effect from milk you're already buying for other things. There's no profit for a supplement company in teaching you this. A capsule with 1 strain, grown in a lab, dried, and shipped to your door is a business built on you needing to reorder every 30 days. A jar with up to 50 living strains that multiplies itself forever is not a business. It's just kefir. That's exactly why almost nobody puts this comparison on the label. Here's what to do this week. Day 1, order a small batch of live kefir grains, a few dollars, one time, ever. Day 2 or 3, when they arrive, buy a quart of milk and start your first batch that same night. Day 4, strain it, taste it, and start the next batch with what's left behind. By the end of the week, you'll know your own rhythm, how long you like to ferment it, whether you prefer it plain or with fruit stirred in. From that point forward, you're not buying probiotics again. You can be the one who never buys another bottle. Tell us in the comments, have you ever made your own kefir, sauerkraut, or sourdough starter? If someone in your family kept a culture going for years, share it below. Next up, how this same kefir turns into a thick, spreadable cheese in under a day. Same jar, same grains, 0 new ingredients. Look at everything covered here. The chemistry, bacteria and yeast converting lactose into lactic acid. Up to 50 species working together instead of 1 strain alone in a capsule. The method, milk in a jar, no heat, 24 hours, strain, drink, start again. The math, $30 to $50 a month at the store. About $1 a batch on your own counter, forever, from grains sourced exactly once. Milk in a jar. A tablespoon of grains. 24 hours. Done. That's the entire method in one sentence. And it's why a jar of milk on a kitchen counter has quietly outlasted a $70 billion industry's best argument for why you need it.
After subscribing, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to turn on notifications. We'd be happy to get to know you.